Having sailed to Alaska a couple times, there are a few things I would have changed if I could go back in time and do it all over again. And today, I'm sharing with you what I wish I had known before I went on an Alaska cruise. Up next. Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. No matter how much research and planning you do before a cruise, there's gonna be some surprises along the way. In fact, when you go to Alaska, a lot of people start looking at how to plan that cruise properly because for a lot of people, this is maybe a once in a lifetime or once in a very long time kind of a cruise. And from packing to Alaska's unpredictable weather to rushing to make the flight home, there are a few takeaways and lessons learned from going to Alaska. And today, I've got a list of those things that I wish I had known before I actually went there. Number one on my list is planning almost every minute of my time on shore. In the Caribbean, you can kind of take it easy when it comes to cruising. You can be more relaxed. You can kind of have a more of a see what happens approach. But in Alaska, there is a much greater emphasis on what you're doing in port. Your time visiting offers you a limited amount of time to enjoy these amazing things. And in every port you visit, there's a ton of cool things to do. There's whale watching, there's rail cars, there's glacier viewings, there's history, and a whole lot more. Doing a little research on each port before arriving can make your time in port go much smoother. Not only that, many popular excursions run the chance of selling out. Planning early ensures you can book an excursion when it's still available and often at the best price. It is crazy how often and how early excursions are selling out now. So it is super important to plan in advance because that doesn't just mean booking an excursion directly through Royal Caribbean either. You can research local tour operators and transportation as well, and as well as looking into things like restaurants, bars, shopping, museums, and hikes you may want to check out. While I don't recommend planning a day in port on a super strict schedule, it can be really helpful to know the basics of what there is to do in each location before arriving. Number two, bring binoculars. I thought people were a little crazy when they said you should really bring a pair of binoculars. I was like, what am I going to do? Go look at something a mile away? What a waste of time. But the reality is binoculars can really make a difference in the scenery that you're seeing because binoculars may not be an object you use very often at home, but they're super handy on an Alaska cruise. Throughout the sailing, having a pair of binoculars allows you to look at the scenery in every direction. And you have to remember that on an Alaska cruise, your ship is sailing much closer to shore than in the Caribbean or elsewhere. In fact, when you're doing the glacier viewing, you get really close to shore, and it's really impressive to be able to see what is just along the way from a much better angle through the binoculars. While sailing through Alaska's Inside Passage on the way to Endicott Arm and Dawes Glacier, using binoculars really made a difference. I borrowed a friend's there, and being able to see that allowed me to see the glacier up close, even though I was still hundreds of feet away. And when you're passing amazing waterfalls and maybe even getting lucky enough to see wildlife, it really makes a big difference. Even if you purchase really basic binoculars on Amazon for like $30, it's going to be worth every penny. Something else I wish I had known about Alaska was how important it is to be flexible because Royal Caribbean cannot control the weather. And when you're in Alaska, it's going to rain, it's going to be sunny, it's going to be hot, it's going to be cold, and then repeat at least 3 or 4 different times. There are 2 ways to approach any unexpected change: by going with the flow or letting it negatively impact your vacation. Your North Star reservation gets canceled because of windy weather, a port changes due to high seas. Sure, it may not be the best news you've ever heard, but remember, Royal Caribbean's top priority is to keep everybody safe. And when you're on shore, my goodness, it can really change all the time. This is why people always talk about layers. I knew about that before my cruise, but your instinct is certainly when it starts raining or things don't go exactly how you plan it to just abort and move away. But the reality is you're in Alaska, you spent all that money to get there, make the best of it regardless of the weather. Something else, speaking of clothing and layering, that I kind of did wrong and I wish I knew better, was packing way too much. It's really easy to look at the weather forecast, read some of these other reviews and packing guides for Alaska, and kind of panic when it comes to packing for your cruise because it's going to rain, it's going to be cold, it's going to be warm. And then, of course, you want to pack for, of course, on board the ship, right? Your outfits for dinner, swimwear, pajamas. I mean, it sounds like you're going to be traveling with a 19th century steamer. So certainly on our first cruise to Alaska, I definitely failed completely in any kind of attempt to try to pack lightly. The reality was I ended up wearing about half of what I actually brought. The old saying to pack a suitcase and take half of the clothes out before leaving for vacation certainly rang true here, and I definitely regretted packing so much. Cruising in cold weather is much different than in warm weather. In the Caribbean, for example, clothes tend to get dirtier much faster due to sweating, heat, sand, and salt water. In Alaska, I was finding that I was shivering instead of sweating, and then I found that my clothes stayed cleaner for much longer. In addition to that, jackets, hoodies, and sweaters can be used up more often than, of course, a t-shirt or pair of shorts that get sweaty or stained or dirty from the beach. In fact, I ended up wearing nearly the same exact outfit every day of the cruise: jeans, waterproof boots, a sweater, and a raincoat. Therefore, most of what I packed remained untouched. Something else I wish I knew before my Alaska cruise was booking a flight home too soon. I booked my departure flight from Seattle at 11:27 a.m. on disembarkation day. Seemed like a perfectly fine time. Originally, we were set to arrive in Seattle at 6 a.m., leaving me plenty of time to get to the airport, or so I thought. What ended up happening is we got back into port a little later, and while I did make my flight home with nearly an hour to spare, I just wish I had booked the flight later in the day to avoid the extra stress I encountered due to my early flight. On the last morning of the cruise, I brought my suitcase to the Royal Esplanade to get in line for disembarkation. At around 7 a.m., there were only a few people ahead of me. Then, the departure process ran into several delays as we entered and docked in Seattle, leading to huge lines and a little bit of chaos. Many passengers were getting nervous about their early flights. Luckily, I was one of the first people in line for departure, so I was able to quickly get off the ship and not run into too much traffic along the way, but the stress just wasn't worth it. While waiting at the airport longer before a flight isn't enjoyable, it's certainly better than missing a flight if things go wrong. Not only that, in this day and age, you can usually get hotels that offer day passes for the day, and that's been a huge benefit. When I tried that actually out on a cruise out of Navigator of the Seas in Los Angeles, ended up being a much better idea. Next on my list is the time change is going to mess with you a lot. Coming from the East Coast of the U.S. and over to Seattle, you've got a 3-hour time difference. Then in Alaska, it's another hour back, and it's just weird, and it messes with your body, of course, because as you're traveling, you're probably taking my advice that I talk about all the time. Come in a day early. Great. You're going to get there and spend all day traveling, get there, but your body needs time to adjust. And we found ourselves when we were on the cruise ship at like 7 o'clock local time being super tired, because for us, it was like 10 or 11 o'clock back at home. And it wasn't until about halfway through the cruise that we finally readjusted to it. So certainly, if I could go back in time, I might have come into Seattle an extra day early or two in order to be able to give myself a little bit better time to getting adjusting to local Alaska time. If that's not possible for you, then my next best advice is to try to adjust yourself to the local time as best you can. Avoid napping in the middle of the day, even though you really want to do it. It really makes a difference if you can go beyond local time as much as humanly possible. In terms of ports, if there's one port that I definitely regretted doing something or wish I had more time in, it was Juneau. The first time I went to Juneau, we did a couple different tours and ended up at the end of the day at Mendenhall Glacier Park, and I regretted not spending more time there. That's why when we went back to Juneau on our next Alaska cruise, I was sure to spend much more time. Mendenhall Glacier Park allows, well, obviously great views of Mendenhall Glacier, but there's much more to it. And when we talk about what there is to do there, you're talking about hiking. And when I think about hiking, I think, oh gosh, I'm already tired thinking about it. But the reality is there's a lot of casual paths and amazing views all around. I remember when we parked our car the second time at the park, there was like a little trail to bring you from the parking lot to the front of the park. And that was a really cool view. We went over rivers and brooks and got great views of the glacier already. So I think in Juneau, you really want to spend most time trying to go to the park to enjoy your time there. One truth about being in Alaska is sometimes you just want to enjoy being there and sitting and stopping to smell the roses, so to speak, or in this case, stopping to look at the glacier and get cool views and let the kids explore a little bit. It was an incredible visit, and Juneau was definitely my favorite port because of the amazing views you had in Mendenhall, and then you go back into Juneau, and there was great food as well. And the last thing I wish I knew before my Alaska cruise was how expensive the shore excursions were going to be. I certainly knew that Alaska had a reputation of being expensive, but I wasn't prepared for the pricing of shore excursions. If you want to go on a glacier via helicopter or maybe a airplane, it's going to cost you like $1,000 for two people to go there for just a couple hours. That's a lot of money for one tour. But in general, the tours just cost a lot more. Of course, you're in the United States, and things cost more in Alaska because it's a remote destination. So combine all these results, and you're going to find that almost any tour is going to cost you way more. My advice and things that I thought about in subsequent visits to Alaska was certainly budgeting appropriately. In fact, I would even recommend going to the lengths of getting a lesser cabin to save money so you have more room in your budget for better excursions. That means, giving up on a balcony cabin in lieu of using that money to be able to enjoy some awesome excursions. In addition to that, it's a really good idea to plan your excursions outside of Royal Caribbean. Again, unlike the Caribbean, in Alaska, almost every single tour that you find in Alaska can be booked independently. In fact, most of the names of the tours Royal Caribbean offers, if you Google them, come up to be the local provider, which ends up being a lot cheaper. Whether it's $10 cheaper or $100 cheaper, that is money saved per person, and it really adds up. So planning ahead, which is the tip I talked about earlier, but also booking independently, managing your time well, but you can have a great time in Alaska without spending as much money necessarily as through the cruise line. And in addition to all of that, booking in advance, because again, tours do sell out. And there were a couple times in which we were left hanging because we had nothing else to book because we tried to book it all at the last minute. So do yourself a favor and book your excursions early, but be prepared for that higher price tag. Ultimately, whether in Alaska, the Caribbean, or anywhere else in the world that a Royal Caribbean cruise ship goes to, a little bit of planning and flexibility can go a long way. And while I made a couple of mistakes along the way, my cruise to Alaska's have become much better as a result of these lessons learned, and I hope that these will help you as well. Let me know in the comments below, what are your lessons learned? What's something you wish you knew before you went on your first Alaska cruise? And if you're going to Alaska for the very first time, let me know in the comments below. Also, what are your concerns about? Maybe we can answer your questions down there below our video. While you're below our video, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. That way, YouTube will let you know when we have a brand new video to share. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.